Now, I did already mention what Node.js is and why we need a server-side language like Node.js in the previous course section. Therefore, I only briefly want to summarize it here again. Node.js is a language, or to be very precise, a JavaScript runtime that we can install on any computer. It allows us to execute JavaScript code outside of the browser. And up to this point in the course, if we ignore the previous course section, we only knew that browsers are able to execute JavaScript code. Well, it turns out that if we install this extra Node.js tool, any computer can execute JavaScript code, and therefore we can use JavaScript in conjunction with this Node.js runtime tool to write code that executes on a server, since any computer can be a server. And that allows us to write server-side code that will, for example, generate HTML instructions dynamically or reach out to a file system or a database with JavaScript and Node.js. Now, I do have a complete deep dive course about Node.js in case you want to learn more, but in this and the next course sections, we got many sections on this actually, you will learn how to use Node.js and how you can write such backend code with Node.js. Now, in order to write Node.js code and write server-side JavaScript backend code with Node.js, you first of all need to install Node.js. And for this, you should visit nodejs.org. Here you'll find download links for the latest version and the long-term stability version. The difference between these two versions is that the LTS, the long-term support version, simply is an older version which still receives active support like security fixes, whereas that latest version is, well, as the name implies, the very latest version with all the latest new features. Sometimes new versions introduce new features or break old features. That's why we have both a stable older version and the latest version to choose from. Overall, it is worth noting though that Node.js is a very stable and well-maintained runtime, and therefore you can download and use the latest version here for this course, even if you see a different, higher version number at the point of time you're viewing this video. What you will learn in this and the next course sections will still apply to that version. So you're not missing anything just because I'm using this version in this course right now. All that being said, you can now download this latest version here, and by default, it should already select the version for your operating system. If it doesn't do that, you can click on Other Downloads, and here you'll find a Windows installer, a Mac OS installer, and you'll also find binaries for Linux, which you can download and use. But by default, the correct one should be pre-selected here. Now, if I do download this, it starts the download and downloads this installer on my system, and that's the case both for macOS and Windows. Once the download finished, we can execute this installer, and here you see the macOS installer that started up, and you can just walk through all the steps that are shown here, and it's the same for Windows. So here I'll continue, accept the license agreement, and basically accept all the default settings, enter my password if prompted for, and install Node.js with that. And as mentioned, it's the same on Windows. You also can just accept all the default settings here, and then finish the installation and close the installer once you're done. With that, we got the Node.js tool installed on our system. And we can now use that tool to execute JavaScript code that may then also use extra Node.js features. Since Node.js is the tool executing the code instead of the browser, we can use any JavaScript features that are supported by Node.js. Now, which features are supported? That's something which you can find in the official docs here on nodejs.org. There you can choose your Node.js version. by default the latest one, and then click on API reference documentation, and you will learn about all the different parts, all the different packages, you could say, that make up the Node.js tool. And these are simply different packages that expose different features that you can use in your JavaScript code. Just as we can interact with the DOM in the browser, we now, for example, can interact with the file system here when executing our code with Node.js. Now, of course, going through these docs can be very overwhelming, especially if you're just getting started, and therefore these docs are a great backup, something to come back to. But we will learn Node.js step by step together over the next lectures and course sections, because there are many important features to explore, many features and patterns which you are going to use over and over again, and that's therefore what we are going to dive in throughout this course.